Hey everyone. I want to talk about the cyclical nature of superhero comics, specifically Marvel and DC. So throughout this video, I'll be referring to those kind of comics as superhero comics, but I'm talking specifically about Marvel and DC, and how the cyclical nature of those doesn't bother me. The reason why I want to go in depth with this is because it's commonly talked about as a flaw, that the characters don't change, that the characters don't develop or become something new, or that it takes like a very long time for changes to actually stick. And there seems to be a frustration with certain characters stagnating, like certain popular characters stagnating. I can understand that perspective. I think there's a general discourse for that in terms of like Spider-Man. I think that is the most common one, just given the lot of the discussions that are happening right now on like YouTube and stuff. I think you can use Batman as an example. Generally, the more popular the character, the more that they will stagnate, because that character needs to be as consistent as possible, because it needs to be recognizable, and change makes a character less recognizable. But yeah, I'm kind of trying to bring a defense to that. And my first line of defense for it is that, well, no two run is the same. So no two comic run is actually, they don't really feel the same. Generally, the writer and the artist, when they get together and they end up writing like a story, the feeling of that run is pretty distinct. So yeah, there is a novelty that can still be had. It's more like the character themselves does not have a long run change. So a run like that can be done, and then whatever changes they make within the run, eventually it'll just return back to status quo, and that run won't matter. But I think it does matter. I think it matters in the sense that you can just read it. You can always read it again to get that feel. I don't think it's that different. It's not like when you read these runs, there's a feeling that at the end of it, it feels incomplete, unless it was like axed early, then it'll feel like that. But I'm kind of talking about like a series that gets to end fully. For these ones, it still has a start, middle, and end. Like there is an arc that happens. It's just it doesn't necessarily carry on to like the next run, or maybe some writers will pick it up like 10 years later, 15 years later. I don't know. I guess my perspective is, do those recognizable characters have to change that much? Like, especially the ones that are basically keeping the industry going, like the Batman and the Spider-Man and all of that. Do they really need to change that much? Like, I get that they're like some people's favorites, but the reason why they are so static is because they are so popular. Like, making them too different wouldn't really work. Like, they're there to bring new readers in to the fold, so they can't change too much. They have to be less elastic. They just have to be. So I can understand like being frustrated with those characters, especially if you love them so much. Like a lot of people end up loving these popular characters when they're younger, and they don't want to like let go of that. They don't want to have to look at this character that they loved all this time and be like, oh well, like this character is never going to change. They're always going to stagnate. They're never going to actually be what, I want them to be. They're never going to like I would have to wait like a very, very long time for this character to change even a little. I get that coming from that place of like, I've engaged with this thing for so long. But simultaneously, there are characters that do change, right? So it's not just comic characters are completely inelastic in their development. No, it's more like the big ones are, but the smaller ones change quite a bit, and they get to develop, they get to go through all these arcs. There are certain things that just stick, and that's just what's happening, and then maybe it'll get retconned like 10-15 years later and something else will happen. So they do change and develop, and they change and develop more frequently when it's on the lesser known characters end. So it's more on like a spectrum of like how elastic their character development ends up being for these comic book characters. Another, I guess, defense I have for this cyclical kind of storytelling is, well, I mean, this is an obvious defense, which is that, well, without that kind of storytelling, you can't have these characters just keep going on and on and on and on. So you can't actually have that kind of experience. They're kind of built to be timeless in a certain way. So that timelessness can't actually work without having can revert back to that not grounded, but like the fundamental tenets of what the character is. You can't actually have a timeless character if they change too much, because then they're not timeless. They're no longer that character. So there is that. And understand this is more of a free-flowing kind of discussion video. And so like another perspective that I want to take on, because I don't necessarily think that it's wrong to be frustrated by this lack of change. I just feel like it's more of an indication of what each person needs from like storytelling. For people who want to feel like, if they experience like a really good run and for that to stick, I guess there is a need for like certain things to have like an impact that lasts a very long time. When you're reading like a comic, you want things to really stretch out for like a while. You want the things to go outside of the run itself. And I think that's where I go in a different direction. I'm very comfortable with things just staying within the run, because from my point of view, when a writer and an artist do something for a character and another writer and artist come into it, it feels very different. Like, to me, it's not even close. And when I say that, I don't mean like it's not even close in the sense that I can't even sense the fundamentals of the character. That's not what I mean. But the way the story is told, the way the character's dialogue is done, it's always different and it's always unique, and there's just never much of consistency. So even if something that was done in a run sticks and then it's used later down the line, it's never used in the same way that this person who introduced it to begin with will use it, right? Like that character trait that they maybe introduced, or this relationship, or this dynamic, or whatever they introduced, the promise that is built with that introduction, I guess, if you're going to look at it as a promise of this means something, this will be used in the future, the person who picks it up and uses it in the future will just use it in whatever way they want. And it never feels like it's that essential thing that they made from that run. It's always like twisted and made into like their own thing by those other writers and by those other artists. So there's never really like that much of a consistency that can really be taken, even if something does stick, right? I feel like there needs to be a certain acceptance of the fact that this cyclical nature for superhero comics, it exists because it's a fundamental tenet to the superhero comics. Like, I don't think they should give Spider-Man a finale or Batman a finale, because I don't think they're made to be those kinds of characters that go through like this arc and then they're done, and then they're just living in a farm or something and they're just, chilling now. Like, I don't think they're supposed to be those kinds of characters. I think those kinds of stories already exist. The thing that I'm really like fighting for, I guess, is the uniqueness that comes from these superhero comics, which is that they go on forever, that you can have a different iteration of the same character with all the quirks of the writer and the artist put into it. And if you hate that run, you can just let go of it and then read another run. And yeah, there might be like permanent changes that happen that you might not like, but I mean, isn't that like with every other story? Like, something happens, you don't like it, but the author likes it, so they'll just keep referencing it. I guess I don't really see it as that different. I treat each individual run as its own story. I treat that as its own, just its own story with like a character that I think looks aesthetically cool. I treat runs the same way I would look at a manga, like a whole series. Like, I compare a whole series of a manga to a run of a comic. Like, that makes sense to me, but I would never compare a whole series of a manga and then compare it to like Spider-Man's history or something. Like, that doesn't really make sense to me because it's not made by the same person. While with like manga, like, it's generally done by the same person and artist until it's finished. So it feels like there is a consistent identity because the writer and the artist are the same. There's a consistency there. While with comic books, it's the benefit is the lack of consistency. Like, that's kind of its identity. Like, that's what these superhero comics are for, essentially, to have characters that don't ultimately change in the end, but still go through a story arc within the run. So you're gonna get a payoff within the run itself, right? Or like within other runs, but it's still going to be done by the same writer and artist. Personally, I don't have that much of an issue in it, But I guess I should also explain like the type of reader I am, and because I'm fully aware that there's so many different kinds of readers, and that can very much change your experience with the type of comics that you actually want to experience. So for me, I just align myself with the writer or the artist. That's just what I do. So there's writers that I like, and then there's everyone else, and there's artists that I like, and then there's everyone else. So that's how I've always engaged with media, and I'm one of those people who also don't care for events. Now, I understand that events within superhero comics is a fundamental part of its identity, but I just don't care for them because I just think they're messy, and I don't like multiple artists and writers on like a book or like on like a story. Like, to me, each tie-in I read, it just feels completely different, and it just doesn't feel like the story. My personal preference is to have a writer and an artist do the whole event and then have tie-ins that are like optional. But then the counter argument to that is, well, like, it's not going to feel interconnected if you don't have like different people jumping in, and like maybe the first issue of the event is that done by the, you know, main X-Men people, and then like the second issue for that same event, which actually has repercussions, is done by someone else. And the value of event is people collaborating and doing those things together. But to me, that diminishes the voice of the story, and I just think the person who understands the voice the fullest should just be given full reign to just write the whole thing. But that's just my perspective, and that goes completely against one of the fundamental aspects of how superhero comics work, which is that events exist. So I guess what I'm trying to stress is that, like, I'm personally at peace with that. It frustrates me if it cuts through like a book or whatever, but then I'll just not read the tie-in. Generally you don't. Sometimes you do, but you generally don't. So I've just, you know, I'm at peace with that. I feel like there might be like a part of enjoying superhero comics that you need to be at peace with just the cyclical nature of it. I feel like there is something just fundamental about superhero comics, especially the way they're treated as like intellectual property for like other, like for like films and for TV shows and all of that. I feel like there is just something fundamental about superhero comics where the characters are supposed to be unchanging to a certain degree. Like, I think that is key to it in a certain way, and I think in the same way, I feel like superhero comics shouldn't really adopt, you know, the manga way of doing things and just all of a sudden try to just become like colored manga. Like, I think they should hold on to their identity. Like, I don't want superhero comics to change the fundamentals of what they are in order to appeal to more people personally, because I don't want it to lose the core aspect of what it is. Like, there isn't technically anything out there that is that similar to like the way Marvel and DC are kind of doing their whole shtick, like with that big of a universe, with events and all that stuff. Like, I don't want the identity of superhero comics to be lost, because there isn't actually much like that out there. I know there are like other stuff, like, you know, maybe like Valiant comics and different kind of universes. I know there are more universes, you know, popping up and all that stuff, and I'm all for that. But I also want to, I guess, stress that they are mostly in their infancy stage, while, you know, Marvel and DC are very much like in a stage where they do have a huge universe. And I feel like that is a core part of the superhero comic identity, just like events is a core part of the superhero comics identity. But I hate events, but I wouldn't necessarily want them to let go of events just to satisfy me, because I think it's a core thing for superhero comics. These recommendations that are given of like, do this business practice and that'll help things, but it's like, I don't want superhero comics to like lose their identities, right? I don't want comic books to lose their identities. Like, I think something that's unique about comics is that you can buy floppies. Like, I don't want that to go away. I don't want single issues to go away, because I think that is unique, and you can generally only really get that kind of experience from that space. Like, I think that's cool. So I don't think things should just become something else. And I think part of like having something thrive is, yes, expanding and innovating and all of that stuff. But part of it is also, there is an acceptance part of like, well, where you ask like, what is like the fundamentals of the way something works? And I feel like for superhero comics, the cyclical nature is a fundamental part. And I feel like the events stuff is also a fundamental part. So when you're engaging with comics, it is kind of like, hey, you have to like engage with the parts that frustrate you too,
Like, I'm frustrated by events, but, you know, I accept it. And because of that, I can be like, yeah, I like comics. But, like, if you're really that pissed off about, like, cyclical comics, like, I don't know, like, it kind of feels like, well, there's the indie scene, you can go there. Or you can look at the more niche characters, because they, you know, they tend to get less interrupted, and they get to change and they get to develop. You can go there. Like, I understand, like, the feeling that it feels like, well, but I like Spider-Man and I like Batman and I like these bigger, more popular characters, and I want to see them grow and change. But, like, it hasn't been like that for ages, and I'm not really sure that it's ever going to be like that. Like, I feel like there is a huge part of it where that is just the nature of things. And even if you go back, like, I don't know how many years you want to go back, things are still, like, dissimilar. Like comic books aren't as big as before, but they're still, like, structurally and, like, foundationally, they are a shared universe, right? Like, as in Marvel is its own universe, obviously, and DC is its own universe. But, you know, there's all these other titles that share that universe, and that is a foundational part of what it is. And also, like, events is a foundational part of what it is. Like, whenever you engage with something, you have to, like, take in all the bad as well. Like, obviously you critique to, like, make something better, right? You voice your frustrations so that something greater can happen, right? But when you voice your frustrations on something that is, like, almost, like, fundamental to, like, what it is and what it has been for, like, ages, sometimes it's like, well, like, what are we actually complaining about? Like what is the like, where is this all going, you know? Like, if we, you know, if that was changed, would it be superhero comics anymore? I feel like that is a genuine question, because it's such a core part of its identity. So yeah, that's kind of like what I think. I'm keen to see what you guys think. Like, do you agree, disagree? You think I just uttered the most heinous shit on the planet? Like, what are your stance? What do you believe? Yeah, and I'm keen to hear. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and take care, and see you guys next time.